Hey guys, Silver Slumbers here. I just want to make a very quick clip. I just want to prove that I'm not AI. This is my real voice. So here is hard tongue twisters for adults. Which wristwatch are Swiss rich watches? Fred fed Ted bread and Ted fed bread. No, fuck. Sorry. Fed Ted Fred bread. You can see. Okay. I'm a real person. This is not AI. I send my clips to my editor and he puts this really nice SFX to make my voice sound more clear, have more of a boom, just something for the audience that I'm trying to target for. So yeah, okay. Enjoy the video.
Good evening. Welcome to Silver Slumbers, a channel where I'm tasked to help you get those soothing Z's that you deserve. If you have a personal horror story yourself and want to share it anonymously, send it to me at silverscarystories@gmail.com. I will display it on screen and I'll leave my email in the descriptions. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any videos like these. And watch my playlist on my playlist tabs to get hours of content to sleep through. In today's video, I'm going to be reading True Paranormal Encounters, Volume 3. So sit back, relax, and close those eyes. And remember, don't get lost in the dark. Warning, some of these stories contain graphic content. Listener's discretion is advised. I grew up in a seriously scary haunted house, so it takes a lot for something like paranormal to really scare me. I've seen things. I've heard things. Just you name it. Startled me, sure. Scare me? Nah. Here's the only thing I've actually been scared. I lived in an apartment complex for about 11 years ago, and other than some terrifyingly large wolf spiders, never heard or saw anything paranormal. Then the old dude who lived across from me had a party one weekend, and his brother died. It was from alcohol poisoning. His body lay there for over 12 hours because everyone thought he was just sleeping it off. After he passed, I would occasionally hear some odd sounds, nothing major. Then one night, I was laying in bed with my toddler, waiting for her to go to sleep, and something blocked the light. This light had been shining into my room from the bathroom. I whipped my head up off the pillow and looked towards the door, and what was standing there was a black mass that was loosely in shape of a person in a doorway. My whole body started to tingle. I squeezed my eyes shut for a moment because I was terrified and unsure if this was a real person who had broken into my house or something paranormal. I popped my eyes back open, and it was gone. I hopped out of bed and grabbed my shotgun and a couple of shells and took off after it. The only door in the apartment still had both locks on, and the chains were still in place. The windows were closed and locked. I checked every bed to make sure that everything was still intact. I didn't find anything. Whoever that was gone. I heard noises after that, but never saw anything again. I moved a couple of months later, when my lease was up. So this happened, I think, about 15 or so years ago, when my great-grandfather passed away. In my culture, the dead are cremated, and there are elaborate ceremonies performed. The body carried by people while chanting the name of the Hindu god, Ram Avtarit, has been cleansed, clothed in some ceremonial colors put on it. I was never very, very close to my grandfather. I barely remember ever having much to talk with him, but my parents say that I used to talk to him a lot when I was a kid. Anyway, when he died, I didn't really know much about him other than he was the patriarch of the family, and everyone respected him. I was barely 10 years old then and was supposed to stay at my aunt's house. Sneaky that I was, I managed to follow my mother when she left for my grandfather's house, unaware that I was a few steps behind her. Anyway, the ceremony starts. There's a lot of crying, and soon 4 people, including my father, my uncles, and someone I cannot remember, carried the body on top of a structure made of bamboo and wood. They chanted throughout the way. Nobody noticed that I was following them. They reached the cemetery. There's a lot of crying, and I just got bored standing there at a distance. It's almost dusk, and sit weirdly on a nearby platform. Would later come to know that it was some sort of memorial for the deceased. Sometime between all this happening, I fell asleep. Hours would go by, and when I woke up, there was no one. Just the last flames burning through pieces of wood. I panicked. I looked around to see if there was anyone else, but no one was there. I started running towards the pyre, hoping perhaps some of my relatives might spot me by the fire and get a hold of me. Again, no one. I start crying. I look around to see if I could find a way onto the street. The cemetery was on the outskirts of the town, and it was huge for my tiny mind. Rows after rows of those memorials I mentioned earlier. It's almost dark, and I could hear animals howling at a distance. While all this is happening, I have a creepy feeling that I was being watched. It sends a shiver down my spine, and to this, I don't remember ever being so shit scared. It was such a dark and nauseating feeling. A sense of impending doom. I cried louder and started running. Little did I know that I was running deeper into the cemetery, farther from the road that would take me home. I reached the edge of the open ground and catch my breath near the tree line. I can hear faint voices coming from beyond the silhouette of the trees in front of me. Perhaps someone might be returning after gathering wood. I am again hit with this nauseating feeling, and it's stronger now. To top it all, every time I walk or run, it felt like I could hear the footsteps, like someone was right behind me. I turned around several times, yet I found no one. So scared at this point that I thought I just might die. I took a leap of faith and ran towards the trees. The sounds of footsteps grew louder and louder behind me. It seems like whoever it was just near me. It was almost like arm's length, like they could just reach out and just grab me at any time. I am audibly sobbing and shouting for help. There's barely any light, and I remember hearing people in the distance. Suddenly, I'm in a clearing and see that there is a community pond with a bathing area. I could see some people in my family, and I ran towards them. No matter how loud I cried, there was no sound coming from my mouth. Finally, an aunt saw me and ran towards me. The last thing I remember before fainting is a hand on my shoulder, and my body almost freezing on the spot. I was sick for a week after that, had nightmares for years, and in general stopped going down to my grandfather's house or even the town. To this day, I find it difficult sleeping in the dark, and sometimes waking up with a cold sweat and a creepy feeling on my shoulder, like someone was holding on to me. It was about 4 years ago. It wasn't the first paranormal occurrence that happened, just the one that scared me the most. One night, my 2.5-year-old son woke up my husband and I when he crawled into our bedroom. I couldn't fall back asleep, so I decided to go work on a project in the crafting room. I was in there for about 45 minutes when the small monitor of the nanny cam started rapidly flicking on and off. The cameras in the living room in our son's room. I went over to the monitor and picked it up. It all of a sudden made this loud, ear-piercing screech like a microphone feedback. It just startled me and I dropped the monitor face down. I noticed the glow around the edges had stopped flickering. I picked up the monitor and turned to look at the screen. I saw my son standing there, as still as a statue in the middle of the living room, staring at the wall. I bolted to the door, with the monitor still in my hand. When I glanced down again, my son's head turned. Only his head, and his eyes were looking directly into the camera in the upper corners of the room. He had no expression on his face at all. I left the room and went through a small kitchen and a dining room, rounded the corner to the living room, and I was shocked. It was empty. The door to our bedroom was on the other side. I went in there and my son was sound asleep in the same position as I left him. My husband looked up from his e-reader. I asked him if he had woken up and went to the living room, and he said no. I asked if my husband had gotten up to go to the bathroom or to the kitchen. No. Thinking maybe that he just didn't see our son try to follow him. But no. My husband swears that he hasn't left the room at all. Our son has been peacefully snoring away the whole time. Like I said before, this wasn't the first time we had been seeing doppelgangers, but it was also such a brief moment that you just really don't have time to get scared. I just didn't have time to register at all. This was different. It wasn't just a glimpse. Above all, it was the look of my son's face, that empty, void stare. When he turned his head to face the camera, still, even to this day, gives me chills just by typing it. I have had paranormal activities my whole life. Almost none of these have been unnerving, so I'll tell you my strangest one. When I was 10, I lived in Southwest Texas. It got so hot in summer there that one day we literally fried an egg on the sidewalk just to test it out and be funny. On this particular summer day, my mom had taken me and my friend to the library to check out some books. We had finished our reading and picked our books, and so we decided to play around in the elevator. There were only 2 floors to the library, and one of us would go into the elevator, and as soon as the doors closed, the other would race down or up the stairs to try to beat the elevator. I was waiting for the elevator on the 2nd floor, and as it dinged, my friend took off. But as I stood there, the doors opened, and I got a huge shock. The elevator was full with about 8 or 9 people, but they were all looking up at the numbers inside, staring unblinkingly like Zen cows. There was a man at the front wearing a black 3-piece suit, gloves, a fedora, and a cane. Keep in mind, this was in Texas during 110-degree Fahrenheit heat. He was gaunt, with a white mustache and slightly resembling the guy from Needful Things. He smiled wide when he saw me and said in a voice that I'll never forget, "There's room for one more." I freaked out. No thanks," I replied. The elevator closed as the man sort of tilted his hat. As I stood there in shock, my friend came up the stairs, slightly winded. "Hey, where were you?" he asked. I explained to him that I couldn't use the elevator because it was just so packed and full. "There was nobody in that elevator," he said. I look back on this often, and the question was, what if I got into it? This haunts me. I have absolutely no clue what would have happened if I got into it, and it is sort of frightening for sure. I know how it all sounds, but I swear to the highest of power that this really happened. Last year, met a girl, fell in love, and got engaged. She had 2 little girls who I loved very dearly. We all moved into a house together October last year. Nothing too out of the ordinary happened. One moment she comes to me and tells me that she's pregnant. She tells me with the girls that she got postpartum very badly and explained that breastfeeding can make her feel worse. I said we could do formula for the baby. The added bonus of this being I can help with nighttime feedings. It wouldn't just all be on her. Fast forward 10 months later, the baby's here. We keep him in a bassinet by the feet of our bed. When it's my fiance's turn to feed him, she prefers to bring him to our bed. I worry that I might fall asleep while holding him, so during my turns, I take him downstairs and lay in a beanbag and watch TikToks while he eats. The girls' bedrooms are across the hall from our room. The baby has a very distinct cry he uses when he's hungry and doesn't want to use his pacifier back in his mouth. Fiance calls it his pterodactyl scream. One night last week, it was my turn to feed him around 3 in the morning. I got up, made his bottle, then took him downstairs. The dog and the cats all followed me. I usually let the dog out to use the bathroom. I changed the baby's diaper, then to get comfy on the beanbag with the baby next to me. Bottle in one hand, TikTok in the other. I let him drink away. He finished and fell asleep. I wasn't quite done with TikTok. I was just watching as I sat up and put his pacifier in. About a minute later in, I hear his pterodactyl scream coming from upstairs. I was very confused and completely shocked. I just froze for a second. I thought I must have been really, really tired. I put TikTok away and then looked down at my son. And just as I was about to stand up, I hear the cry from upstairs again. There was no denying what I heard this time. I got my flashlight on my phone out and cautiously head up the stairs, trying to come up with any rational explanation that I thought of. I just kept hearing things that aren't there. Then I opened our bedroom door. My wife is sitting up, wide awake. I asked her if she heard that, and she said, "Yeah." I said it sounded like our baby, but what the hell? What was that? Because I had my baby in my hand, and she was quiet. My wife suggested that maybe one of the girls made the noise. I handed her the baby and went to go check on both of them. Nope. Both of them are sound asleep. Both the cats and our dog and our baby were all downstairs with me. I know the sound was from upstairs, so none of them made it. I was really freaked out about this at this point. I returned to our bedroom. My fiance was putting the baby in the bassinet and laying down to go back to sleep. I whispered, "The hell was that?" And she just said, "Nope. You're not going to talk about it and pretend that like it never happened." She fell asleep, and so did I. It's been about a week now. No other noises since that night. And I don't rest too easy knowing that something is in my house. Just for some context, I suffered from a massive stroke recently, so I apologize for some spelling or grammar or some formattive errors that I made. In 2012, I have suffered a stroke that unalived me. As I was slipping away, I had felt an overwhelming peace come over me like I've never felt before. Things went black, then I was ascending above and I saw the city below. Next to me, I heard a voice from this orb. It contained a variety of colors and different light patterns. It also had mist coming out of it. It was a female's voice, and she was telling me how excited that she was that she finally get to be with her family and to see her mom and her dad again. I started to feel unsure and told her that I was not supposed to be here. Suddenly, I was standing in an otherworldly place that was just absolutely gorgeous. All of the structures in the buildings were made out of what looked like similar to marble, but it had an iridescent color between the marble and the buildings were decorated with colorful stones with gold embezzlements lining the building and glass fencing. I walked along the path with my arms crossed and holding to my body. I felt lost, and everyone around me was chatting happily with each other in this otherworldly looking clothing of satin like linens. Some people held hands and were close and joyful with each other. This place was absolutely beautiful. I came upon an old man who was sitting near a tree. It would seem to be teaching a class with people surrounding him. Some were sitting and others were standing. He called me over to join him. He was teaching a lesson of what life is supposed to be like on Earth, what it was originally supposed to be, and how humans were supposed to be carrying on for the world and the inhabitants on it. But materialism had gotten in the way, among other things. I felt an overwhelming knowledge came over me as he continued to teach his class about the world and the universe and life and death. Everyone began to surround me, and the old man put his hands on my shoulder, and he said to me, "It's not your time yet. You will know when it is." The people from the class all came in and held me in a circle, and suddenly, I came back. I opened my eyes and took a deep breath in. I was alive and back into my earthly body. This is how I believe in God and also reincarnation. I don't claim a religion because my beliefs are now a mix of things. Unfortunately, slowly that knowledge that was instilled into me slowly slipped away over the years, but I feel like it's in the back of my mind. To me, religion became several fingers pointing to the same being. I don't need a religion to dictate my relationship with God. If you're all wondering, I am now 27 and suffer residual effects that disable me, but I keep myself going. My body may not be working properly, but my brain still does. And I focus expanding my knowledge in various areas. Okay, here it goes. I have a medical background and certification I rarely use though. I keep going back and paying to renew it, but anyhow, I volunteered almost immediately thinking that I could help those who lived through Katrina. That was not the case. There were a few of us who assigned once the water started to recede to find houses that had dead bodies in them. If you have ever had to do with body recovery, when it was just been there lying around the heat and in water for a few days, sometimes a week at a time, you know exactly how the smell smells like. It does sort of smell like any other dead carcass, but just worse. I really can't explain it, but maybe somehow sweeter smelling? Anyway, the key to not vomiting is placing Vicks under and around the bottom of your nose. It doesn't keep all the smell out, but it's really enough to help you tolerate the smell without vomiting. We had to go to each house and go inside in wadding boots to look for dead bodies. Many of them washed out to sea, but some were still in the houses that lived in prior to the hurricane. If we found a dead body, we spray paint a big X on the outside of the house. This other guy had been doing it for a while, and we got assigned each other almost every other day. We got along pretty okay, and he didn't vomit at the ones that had been gotten to. We came out to this one old shack. I say shack because it was a pretty rundown and what it had to been a very bad neighborhood. Right away, I got chills down my spine. I knew there was something really wrong. Not like finding a body kind of wrong, but chilling kind of wrong. New Orleans has certain areas that just give you off these vibes, and my understanding is that there is a lot of voodoo practices in certain areas. Anyway, against everything my body was screaming at me, we went in the house. The first thing I could smell was a body. The second thing was almost earthly and mold. I looked at my partner. I will call him Jay. Jay was white as sheet. I could tell he was getting the same feeling that I had been getting. It was obvious from the weird bones hanging from the ceiling. I would bet my money there were cats. There has been something odd going on in this house. There are strange beads and carvings on the bare wood of the walls. We went into what was a kitchen, and There, chained to a beam, was an old lady, and what was left of her. She had chained herself by the wrist to the beam. Her guts had fallen out into the floor. The creepiest thing was her face still looked as if she was alive and staring at us with a wicked smile, showing only partial teeth. My skin started to crawl as the goosebumps spread over my body and my hair neck stood up. I swear, I know it was looking at me. Suddenly, I heard the most unearthly crackle noise I've ever heard in my life. My flight or fight kicked in. Jay and I noped the F out of there. We quickly painted a giant X and literally ran to the next house. Goosebumps were filling up to my skin. Now, I don't know if that old lady had practiced voodoo or whatever, but that scared the ever-lating crap out of me. It still gives me nightmares. The people I feel sorry for are the ones who had to take out that crazy lady from that crazy house. Jay and I discussed it that night after what went down. We went back to the hotel north from there, and he heard the loud cracking too. When he told me this, we both got chills at the same time. We both tried to convince ourselves that it was just the wind or something else. I bought my first home in 2003 and was over the moon. Shortly after moving in, two of my neighbors had been joking with me about the ghosts in my house. Well, I thought they were joking, so I just played along and pretended that I'd seen one and acted like it was no big deal. But really, I had no idea. Well, as the time went on, in the summer, I met more and more of my neighbors, and strangely, they all brought up the same topic. Finally, an elderly woman on the block who was quite kind and friendly told me the story after I asked her. I knew she wasn't going to screw with my head, which is why I asked her in the first place. Turns out the previous owner purchased a home and never lived there because she said it was haunted. Sounds in the night with footsteps and sobbing, and glimpse of a man sitting in the kitchen covered in blood. One of my neighbors helped with the renovations of the house and said that he was putting up drywall when all of a sudden he felt something lift up his dreadlocks. Though I had paranormal experiences before, it had been years, but by the time I chalked it up, it was just night terrors. Anyway, one day I went to a small neighborhood video store to rent a movie. I had to fill out a form with my demographic data and then look for my credit card. The owner of the store had looked at the form and said, "Oh my God, you live in that house?" I asked her, and she meant that she explained that her former employer had committed unaliveness in that house. She came to the house as soon as she heard about it, but the house had been taped off by the police as a potential crime scene. She told me that he just moved into that house with his partner and called his mom because he wanted to invite her over to meet his partner and come out to her. This was in the early 90s when being gay was a big deal. His mother already knew that he was gay because he bought a house with a man and disowned him right over the phone. That same week, he received a letter from the HIV testing center stating that he was tested HIV positive. This is when HIV was a death sentence. He then sat on the kitchen table, ate a bowl of cereal, and then eliminated himself with a revolver. Since then, she had multiple paranormal experiences in the store, with videos flying off shelves, even levitating off shelves. The most I've experienced is sounds at night, sounds of Cheerios being poured into a bowl. I don't eat cereal, and sounds of sobbing in the kitchen. I often awake to both. I remember my grandmother saying, "When the dead come to you, they want something. Perform an act of charity in their name and pray for them." So I did. I sat down in the kitchen one night, lit a candle, and told that each night I would recite a novena prayer. On the 9th night of the first novena at St. Anthony's, who was a patron saint of the lost souls, I heard an uncontrollable sobbing. I felt the strong presence of grief and despair and the sound of hyperventilating breathing, as though someone who could not catch their breath. I sat in the presence of knowing that this was not malignant, but rather a connection of intimacy and compassion of which he was in need. For 45 days, I said a novena prayer before a lit candle for his soul and had a mass said in his name. A few times I had awakened to his feels of his presence staying over my bed, but I knew it was not malignant presence. This still happens from time to time, but less and less frequently. I'm 49 years old. I'm a guy. By the time I reached my early 20s, I was on the opinion that there was nothing to life, but what you could see or touch, nothing else. If you're reading this, then you know that this is no longer the case. I guess the best way to start telling you about this whole thing was about a friend that I had in high school, Todd. So Todd, I met him through another guy that I knew since 6th grade. Todd was just a really good guy, always upbeat, loyal, just a solid person. Looking back on it, probably the most genuine human being I've ever met in my life, including up to now. We were around the same age, and when I was around 19, it had been a while since I last seen him. And our mutual friend calls me and told me that Todd's house had caught on fire, and sadly he had passed away trying to save his younger siblings during the fire. I can't remember exactly, but I know he made several trips into the house, saving at least 2 of his siblings. It went in again, and the roof collapsed on him, and another one just like 5 foot from the door, eliminating both of them. Just a horrible thing that I just couldn't believe. It was the first person other than an elder family member that I knew who passed away. Fast forward to 4 or 5 years later, I'm in my car heading to my friend's house that he lives in the same neighborhood where this happened. I'm maybe a mile or so away from where I'm heading, and about 100 yards or a little more ahead of me, there is this guy who was wearing jeans and a dark hoodie, and his hands are in his hoodie pocket, with his head looking down at the ground as he's walking. For one, this is how I remember Todd. Seems like he's always remembering something about him, with wearing jeans and a hoodie and hands in his pocket. So that really caught my eye. I think Todd had one leg a little longer than the other, or something like that, so he had like some kind of limp. When he was alive, I could have easily picked him out during a crowd, just by how unique his walk was. So as we were getting closer to each other, I just felt something is not right or just off. I can't really put my finger on it, but as I get to him, I slow down and stop right next to him, and he stops as well. As we both come to a stop, he raises his head and looks right at me. We were maybe just 10 feet apart, one of the 2 lanes road anyway. When he looks at me, it's him, and his face is glowing the most brilliant green you can imagine. We look at each other for maybe 4 or 5 seconds. It seemed like he had this calm, peaceful look to his face. I think I was in shock. I guess. I don't know, but I let my foot off the brake and coasted down maybe 30 or 40 feet down the road and stopped again, but I was scared too. I guess is the word to look back, so I sat there for a few seconds and just pulled off and went to where I was going. I hear people talking the colors in heaven being so much brighter or just more beautiful colors while explaining NDEs, and I think I get it now. I think that's where this green was from. About a week before this happened, I was having a conversation with a buddy of mine, and I explained this to him, that I was an atheist. I truly believe Todd was on that road that day to let me know that there was something else, just more to life than just what we normally see around us. It changed my whole outlook on life in a split second. Well, that's what happened. Sorry if it was too long and very wordy, but it is the truth. I had many experiences then, but the rest are dark. Maybe I'll write more about those. Just God bless all of you. When I was a child, I had two near-death experiences. I know this is the internet and people can tend to lie, but please, please believe me when I share these stories, because they are 100% the truth. The first time I was 3 or 4 years old, I was at my grandparents' house on a Sunday morning, and while my family was getting ready for church, I was busy getting into trouble. I found a key on a marble table my grandparents had in their hallway, and I had a fun idea to stick it in my pocket just below the table. I was a strong-willed, naughty child, and often did the exact opposite of what I was told. So, of course, I had to see what fun I was missing out on. It was the first time I ever recalled hearing my internal voice, or whatever you call it. When I stuck the key into my pocket, with my right hand, I began to seize with a charge of electricity through my body. I especially remember a voice inside my head saying, "This is what dying feels like." I flew back and hit my head on the marble floor. My grandparents were Italian, so everything was marble. I then began with my ascent. I remember traveling out the dining room window and heading upward. Not straight up, but forward and up in a slope. I did not recognize any of the vague faces that lined up in a channel of light that I was traveling up to. But again, as a child, I did not know anyone had died at this time, so there was no familiar faces but a presence of entities, nonetheless. Their presence felt warm, welcoming, and felt as though they passed right through me, like two different smoke trails. I was weightless and unafraid. It was as if I was home, like this was something familiar, like I should know this. Another way to describe the feeling was that if there was mist surrounding me, there was some sort of feel that was shifting through and that I never experienced in my human body. This light that most people were called, it was there. At the highest point, I encountered the presence of something known or something authoritative. A voice without words told me that I was not ready yet, that I had to go back and I was given my mission. For personal reasons that I would like to keep to myself, but if this piques interest with true believers, I may share. I can say that this was a simple message, one my heart and mind understood. Even for a child, which I did not feel like a child at this point. Upon receiving my commission, I was no longer in the presence of the light. I was turned away and began to descend. This is where things changed. I have not researched other people's NDEs, near-death experiences, as to preserve my uniqueness of my own experience. So I cannot speak to whether this next part is common or not, but it has stuck to me every single day. Immediately, all the warmth and comfort I felt in the light began to fade, fast. Every weight that had been lifted or lightened as I went up began to surround me on my way back down towards my body. Peace was replaced with fear. I worried and wondered how I could find my body. I was a little girl. How could I get back to my grandparents' house in Montreal, a big city that I don't know? I have never even crossed the street by myself at this point. I saw with the consciousness, sight available to me, the whole city below. This occurred in the early 80s, and I've never seen an image similar to Google Earth View, but that is exactly what it looked like to me. I zoomed closer and closer. I was not in control of where I was going, but clearly my spirit knew how and where my body was. I cannot reiterate enough how much weight I felt returning. It was as if home was being ripped away from me, and all the trappings that even my young body felt had been reapplied with each and every meter I came close to rejoining myself. Some details are foggy. I remember my older sister kicking me while I was on the ground, thinking that I was just faking it. It was the first physical sensation I can recall feeling. When I woke up, I pushed my sister to the side, and I went to my dad's room. He was getting ready for church, and I said, "Daddy, Daddy, I saw Jesus." For a 3 or 4-year-old, that's all I knew, so that is how I explained it. I remember my dad taking both hands and looking for marks. There were none. Let me answer a few questions for any skeptics out there. My grandparents had an old house with old wiring. There was nothing to cause a breaker to trip or some kind of current. I don't know anything about voltage. That went through me until I blasted back into the ground. It was the 80s and there was nowhere to take me after the incident. So I had no medical proof of this, just my memories. Also, because it was the 80s, parents parented a little more relaxed. There was no fuss made about the incident, though my oldest sister did get a lot of trouble for kicking me. Another thing to note is that this must have been a very traumatic experience for me as a child. And like many experiences that are too big for a young mind to handle, it was stored away deep into my mind until I could resurface when I was prepared to handle this repercussions. I was well into my 20s before the memories fully resembled in my mind. At the time, I went to my dad's and asked if he remembered. His memory was jogged to the event. I described it knowing how big of a moment it was. We were all dumbfounded that this was swept over so easily in our family history. So, that was event number 1. The second event occurred when I was 11. I was playing with a boy, trying to keep up and showing how tough I was. We were getting up to no good and unattended. It was the 80s. Remember, kids came home when the streetlights come on. In our ever-increasing moments of daring activities, trying cigarettes for the first time happened that day as well. We decided we would play a choking game. I choked him first, he tapped out. I refused to be a sissy like him, so I'd never tapped out. The situation was nearly the exact same as the first time. Although I did not consciously remember my first NDE at the time, I experienced my second one. Everything that happened outside my body was the exact same. It felt doubly familiar. The fact that it happened years earlier only made the scenario mean more of a commonplace. Doesn't everybody have this happen to them? The same sensation of going forward and up, being lifted, becoming ever lighter and more free from the white noise and anxiety that permitted our earthly existence greeted me again. Again, I did not recognize a single soul that lined up my channel upward, but the presence was comforting as they greeted me on my journey up towards home. Once more, I was in the presence of light. No sandaled giant sitting upon a throne, just light and love. It was just total peace. I was again told my mission and redirected back to my earthly body. The same feeling of weight returning was upon me. The same fear of finding my body. The mental chatter we all experience grew louder the closer I got. When I awoke, it was a feeling of cold wet on my face. The boy who had strangled me was weeping over me. His tears had soaked my face. He was angry, thinking that it was a terrible prank that I played. But I had gone gray, and there was blood that came out of my right ear. He knew that I was dead, but I came back. We did not tell a single soul for fear that we would get in trouble for our antics of smoking and running amok in the forest like wild things. We thought for sure that we were caught a whooping for our stupidity, so we swore to each other to never speak of it ever again. I don't know if I suffered any remaining damages as a result of the two experiences. Those who know me might say that there was something a little off about me, but nothing that became an impediment of me living a normal life. I will say that whether it was the results of the NDEs or not, I do have a heightened sense of the unexplained. I have no fear whatsoever of death. Quite the opposite. I long for that feeling of freedom and the feeling of being home. Currently, I'm a nurse and want to work in the field of those who are dying. Palliative care is the field I am drawn to help people transition with the ease and less fear towards what awaits. It had taken a long time to get here, but I believe that part of the reason I was sent back was to fulfill this dream and help others untangle the mysteries of the afterlife. I can only speak from my experience. I am not looking for a debate, nor do I want to have to defend my two most defining moments of my life. I simply want to share for the first time what it feels like for me to die twice.